Hello, you're tuned into a special discussion on The Wire, but before that, let's take a look at the big numbers. As per latest data, over 3,900 people contracted the virus and 195 people died in a single day. A total of over 46,000 people have been infected in India, over 13,000 have been cured, and 1,583 have died. This has been the highest number of infections and deaths recorded in India. In our episode today, I am joined by Siddharth Deb, who is a Policy and Parliamentary Counsel at the Internet Freedom Foundation. His organization has been actively understanding the many nuances of contact tracing apps in India and in other countries. Other than India, at least 29 countries are using contact tracing apps around the world. In China, users scan QR codes to share information about their health status and travel history. These codes need to be scanned before boarding buses and trains, something which even India is looking at to make the app an e-pass for movement of people. In Italy, the app works on a voluntary basis. In Germany, the government has not developed a homegrown app but is looking at support from US tech giants like Apple and Google. Privacy rights experts around the world have risen to the occasion and are talking about the concerns related to such contact tracing apps. As the world scrambles to limit the spread of an infectious disease, it is crucial to understand how governments can navigate between essential contact tracing and user privacy. In India, according to latest news, if a person residing in Noida, a suburb near Delhi, does not have the Arogya Setu app installed in their phones, it will be considered a violation of the lockdown and the person could be punished. Earlier this week, the app was made mandatory for public and private sector employees, after which Rahul Gandhi and Shashi Tharoor from opposition party Congress called this a sophisticated surveillance system. However, in an interview to The Print, the CEO of MyGov India that designed the Arogya Setu app said that the app won't steal people's data and is only for critical purposes such as medical emergencies. So far, 9 crore downloads have been recorded by the Niti Aayog in India. Let's bring in Siddharth Deb at this point to talk about some of these concerns, how the Arogya Setu app operates, what is problematic about it, and why it is so. Thank you, Siddharth, for speaking to The Wire.
Yes, Siddharth, my first question to you is, how are these contact tracing apps working in other countries, and how is India using this app, using the Arogya Setu app to gather data?
Right. So already countries like Australia are first saying that let's create a specific legislation that can govern the safe use of any contact tracing app. Countries like Australia have also done something like a privacy impact assessment to evaluate exactly what are the civil liberties harms of contact tracing apps. In these other countries, if I as a user have an app or a contact tracing app, then if by chance I go to a doctor and get tested, I have the ability, and look, in all of this, I have full control over my data. I will be able to tell the contact tracing app, boss, I've tested positive. So how about, and then they have to notify people that I've been in close contact with this particular device, not this particular, but you have come in close contact with someone who has been tested positive by a trained professional to have the coronavirus. So given that, then it will also send an advisory. As a result, you should either quarantine yourself or you can go and get yourself tested. In India, the app is, to what extent it's linked with like actual medical tests, that in itself is in the dark because of the lack of transparency with how the app works. Whereas that is not the requirement when it comes to the Setu app, so essentially an algorithm is making a decision as to your level of risk exposure.
So there could be people, just a scenario, there could be people filling in that, oh yes, they have these symptoms, and could that be a possibility, and then it could lead to all other things?
So, it's entirely possible that if you fill in the fact that, let's say you're of a certain age and above, and let's say you have certain conditions or pre-existing health conditions, then there's a greater risk that the Arogya Setu app may just say that, you exposed to the virus, so how about you not step outside? In other frameworks, they're trying to link as much as possible the fact that anyone who, as much as possible, all risk notifications are linked somehow to a medical test. Users have the agency or the autonomy to be able to tell the app that I tested positive.
Right.
Whereas that autonomy is not there with respect to the Indian app.
And how confidently can we say that the data that we have on the app right now is accurate and reflects the actual situation?
It's hard to say, given the fact that our testing is not very high compared to other countries in terms of number of tests, and the fact that the information with respect to how the pathogen spreads is a constantly evolving thing. So, for instance, what scenarios like catching the virus from touching a particular infected surface. There's no way that an app can capture something like that, or it's very difficult for an app to capture something like that. So, given that there is an impreciseness to testing itself, the app will only be able to replicate it on some level to what is the extent to which we're testing people. The risk also with like false positives which come up because of the app is that you might see like a lot of panic-stricken people going to like flooding hospitals or places where testing is being administered, and that will put a greater stress on the available capacities which exist.
Now, what are the broad privacy concerns that the Arogya Setu app has?
The contact tracing app should be strictly controlled by public health officials. But in India, the role of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare or state-level health departments is minimal to negligible when it comes to the Arogya Setu app.
Okay.
So therein lies the fact that there are risks of mission creep, where, for instance, it may be repurposed other applications as well beyond just responding to tracing the coronavirus, the spread of the infection. Now, what I mean by that is, if you look at, let's say, the terms of service and the privacy policy of the Arogya Setu app, there is enough vagueness in the language for the government to use the app for other administrative functions like, let's say, quarantine enforcement. Now, other governments which come from can be described as democratic societies are already saying that contact tracing applications should not be used towards quarantine enforcement, or should not be shared with police or with law enforcement authorities and so on and so forth, because that is an excessive restriction or violation of people's fundamental rights.
But none of the terms of service for this app does not say any of this. It does not say.
It does not specify which government department will get access to this data. Now, secondly, for any restriction to the right to privacy, is that it must satisfy threshold of necessity. Now, what that means is that any restriction by government right to privacy, of course, one level of necessity is it will justify that, look, we're responding to an epidemic, so any technological intervention should suffice. But no, there is a second layer of burden of proof which is placed on the government. The government must show you that an app, like, let's say, Arogya Setu, is actually tangible empirical data helping with the government of India's response to the coronavirus. And until now, there has been no public document which shows exactly how it's helping, to what extent it's helping, and therefore justifying the need for an app like Arogya Setu. Now, for instance, they're saying before any contact tracing solution is deployed, there needs to be necessarily a proof of concept. There is no proof of concept with respect to the Arogya Setu app. Another risk with respect to possible permanent systems of surveillance is the fact that the government of India has not come out and said that this is a temporary measure, and the fact that this will be reviewed every, let's say, 90 days. And if it is effective, then there is an override function where an independent institutional mechanism, let's say a parliamentary standing committee or something like that, can say that let's delete the systems and roll back the app. Because it's not helping with the public health response, and on top of that, people's civil liberties are being excessively being restricted.
Right. So it does not have this provision.
Yes. There is no or even if there is no provision, there is no declaration that this is a temporary system. And this is how we'll keep it temporary. When you're registering for the app itself, it collects about 7, 8, 9 data points, which are either personal information or sensitive personal information, like your name, age, sex, address, your travel history, and so on and so forth. Right? And those 5-6 data points are mentioned in the privacy policy. In other apps, that much information is not collected of the user itself.
And what are those other apps, for example?
So, for instance, now the Singapore app, which is not the best example, but it's still something through which other governments have essentially followed the Singapore path. So, which is why I'm using it as a benchmark, and we've analyzed it in our working paper. Only collects one data point, which is phone number. That phone number generates a unique device ID, and that device ID basically is then used to match it with other devices it comes in contact with, and that creates another level of a temporary, a dynamic device ID as well. So there are levels of anonymization taking place. The original point also, just one data point is collected, which is a phone number.
No, I have one question here. So this comes from a limited understanding of, data and privacy, but nevertheless a question that, users are providing name and phone numbers and email IDs to a lot of other apps that they may be using, So what is the difference then? How does it make, how does it become a risk in this case and maybe not in others, for example, any other app that you may be using?
So there are two levels to this.
Yeah.
When you're using a private sector app, there is a great deal of autonomy to what extent people can want to share and share their data with these platforms. And with the help of data protection laws, what will happen is there will be further restrictions to what extent these private actors can use people's personal data. When a government restricts someone's fundamental rights, there is a heightened risk on many levels, from, let's say, their ability to coerce citizen behavior towards a certain action, which they would ordinarily not do. There is a risk of possibly, let's say, going to jail in certain circumstances. Thirdly, also the risk in case of the Aarogya Setu app, where a determination could be made by the government of India whether you can go to work or not. Right? That's very different to you sharing your data with a private sector entity, which by the way already has certain obligations vis-a-vis data protection laws as well, where even the future data protection law that does kick in will try to hold these guys accountable.
So I've been reading that the terms of service of the app say that the government is not liable if there's a breach. So it says that there's a liability limit. What does this mean? Can the government not be held accountable if there is a breach or if a vulnerability in the app is exposed?
So the thing is that when there is a liability limitation clause, I think you can still go to court, but most common citizens will not know that they have the option of going to court to be able to hold government accountable when there is a fundamental breach.
Okay.
Because it's a signaling issue as well. Because when a citizen goes to the contract, it says that the government cannot be held liable. Many citizens will just be like, okay, fine, if I can't do it, then there is no other recourse. It's only if you get advice from lawyers who have a sound understanding of contract law, will they be able to understand the nuances that they may or may not have a case. But that muddying of the waters or that vagueness prevents people from seeking recourse in the courts,
Right. So the app is not open source, and when we say it's not open source, what do we mean? One, and second, for comparison and for clear understanding, which are the apps which are open source?
Okay, so these guys, Singapore's Trace Together app is already open source.
Okay.
It's the underlying protocol, the Blue Trace protocol, is available on GitHub for people to go check out.
Okay.
And what that means is basically it gives you, if you open source an app, you can figure out that what is the app trying to do in the back end with respect to using people's data. To what extent is it collecting its data? How is it being stored? And who can have access to it, and so on and so forth.
Right. So do we know that some of the private sector apps, are they open source? If you can list some of those.
With respect to, there are different ways to be transparent.
Okay.
Essentially, open sourcing is one of the ways to be transparent, right?
Okay.
And the Singapore government has taken the step of open sourcing this app.
Okay.
That helps build trust, not just with citizens, but with external parties and researchers and so on and so forth, because they can figure out, okay, this is what the app is trying to do, right? And that helps build trust. Okay, this is a safe product that citizens can use. And so transparency can happen either through open sourcing the underlying code, or you can publish as much literature as possible as to what is the level of encryption which is being deployed by the app, in what circumstances is data being anonymized, so under what circumstances is data actually leaving people's devices to go to an external server. Why is it that Government of India is taking a centralized approach as opposed to a decentralized approach? And then you need transparency insofar as what is the effectiveness of the app, then how are we keeping them with respect to time. So you need to look at transparency in a broader horizon. One of the ways to engender transparency is open sourcing the code.
Why does making this app mandatory is so problematic?
When you make something mandatory, that erodes people's autonomy, and then there is no question of having the right kind of checks and balances with respect to this sort of exercise.
True.
And essentially, even if it is mandatory, at least there should be an anchoring legislation that says, these are the checks and balances, these are the safeguards, and so on and so forth. And there is no anchoring legislation as such.
Right. No, but my question is that if, for example, if it's not mandatory, let's say, how will it be put to effective use?
As in, there are technologists who are talking about the fact that, look, anyway in India, more than half the people in the country don't have smartphones.
Right.
So even if you have 500 million people who download the app, then what about those who either have only feature phones or those who don't have devices altogether?
Right.
So that exclusion, there will nevertheless be an exclusionary impact by the app itself. And on top of that, there are concerns of when you make something mandatory, that can lead to overt or excessive restrictions to people's privacy as well, autonomy as well, their agency. Now think about families which have just one device in their household.
Right. No, because we're also seeing reports which say that, people who are testing positive, if they don't have the app before they test positive, you cannot, find out if that district, how many people actually tested positive in that district. So the data on the app differs from the data on papers that we have, that these many other people in the district who tested positive, because people have not downloaded the app, or like you said, they may not have smartphones.
Yes, and like when app says something like please don't share your device with someone else because that could lead to a risk of you being deemed that could lead to a risk of a false positive that you're determined to have COVID-19 when you actually don't have it. That creates its own bundle of risks, and it'll really be exaggerated in like marginalized communities where not everyone has either a smartphone or a feature phone.
Right.
And so on and so forth as well.
So far, I mean, as per your assessment and Internet Freedom Foundation's assessment, is that Singapore apparently is doing a relatively good job.
Singapore, so contact tracing in general is an experimental technology across the world. It is just one of those systems which has become popular because when the Asian countries started doing well, in the spread of the infection, they were doing 4 or 5 different things, both offline and technological. Now, the countries like India are gravitating towards the technological responses because also there is a lack of capacity in terms of building up offline capabilities like the availability of beds, the availability of testing, the availability of personal protective equipment for doctors to ensure that there's a safety of the healthcare providers and so on and so forth. But it's easy to replicate building an app which they've done in a very short period of time. You can see that they started the making of the app on March 19th. It was available for download on April 2nd. And that pace of from commencement to availability in the market is because there is no legal system that can ensure that there is a certain quality assurance of the product itself, that there are certain ethical and legal safeguards to ensure that there is no abuse. But all of that is missing right now, unfortunately, in India.
All right, Siddharth, thank you so much.
Thank you.